Hi, welcome to this lesson. So in this lesson, we are going to create our very first project. That is, we are going to create our project. So let me show you how to create a new project. Let me show you how the CLI creates a project, what the files we are getting. I'll explain the files as well. Okay, so it's going to be an interesting lesson. Let's look at it right now. Alright then, so of course you'll have to open up your terminal in the folder that you want your project created in, which is my Angular folder in this particular drive. And just use ng. ng is the command that you'll be using for any Angular related command. Just like we have npm for node related command or npm related command, we have ng for Angular. So ng, new, that's it. So new represents the new project that you're creating, and you can give any name for your project. So I am going to be naming mine crash course. Right, so I'm just going to name mine crash course. I'm going to press enter. Now, immediately after you press enter, it's not going to create the project. It's going to ask you a couple of questions. So let me just walk you through them. Alright, this turned out to be a learning opportunity, right? So with Angular, you can't create project names with special characters. So what we can do instead is, just like we do with JavaScript, we can use camel casing. So I'll just replace this with crash like this, but course with a capital C. Right, now if I press enter, this should work. Now, see, every time for this to start working, it's going to take a little bit of time, like a few seconds. Now, depending on how fast your computer is. So if there's a problem, don't worry about that. Now, we are going to be talking about the basics of routing in this particular crash course. So what I'm going to do is, while it's asking me if I'd like to add Angular routing, right? So I'm going to give Y in here to indicate, yes, I do need Angular routing. So it would install the predefined files that we need for routing as well. So for now, for the first few lessons, we would completely ignore all of these files. So don't worry about that. And for the style sheet format, there are a bunch of options for you. You have your CSS, SCSS, SAS, and less. Now, if you know any of these other things, and if you're confident in them, then you can, of course, go for these options. But if not, it's better to just stick with CSS because it's more familiar. So you can use the arrow keys to go down and press enter, or just let it be in CSS and press enter, and that's pretty much it. They're not going to ask for any other questions, and after that you are just going to have your packages installed, the npm packages necessary for Angular routing, and for the unit testing, and everything that comes with your Angular project that's going to get installed in these packages. It's going to take a couple of minutes actually. If you have a very fast computer, it's not going to take a lot of time, but if your computer is extremely slow, it might even take more than 15 minutes. So I recommend that you wait until then. Alright, so I'll just pause the video and come back after this is done. There you go. So it has been installed. It took a couple of minutes actually. Alright, so you're going to get a bunch of warnings, but it doesn't actually matter. So just go to File and open the folder, and let's go to our Angular folder, and let's try to open the new project that we created. What did I name it as? I think I named it as crash course like this, right? So just select that and press on select folder, and your folder should be selected. Now that later, that's it. Now you can open up a new terminal or something like that, or you don't have to have a new terminal. You can just do this and it would open it up as well. I'll just close the debug. I'll just have this. So now you can run this code, and that would work as well. So while I explain the files, I'll just do an ng-serve, because that's the command that you have to use to open a local host. So if you worked with anything that's related to localhost or any of those things, you know that with localhost you can just open a development server and it'll show you the output as you change things in your project, right? So that's what I'm trying to do. So ng-serve will open that up. While it's doing that, let's take a look at all of the files that we just have here. So now, of course, you have your node modules. Now this particular folder, you don't really have to look at this. Now this is just all of the packages from npm that are related to your Angular project. So you have your Angular dev kit, you have Babel, which is for development later on, Then there's a CSS tool. So if you just go through this, you'll find a lot of files like this. Okay, so you don't really have to do anything with these files because these files will help you while you create your code. All right, and the source, right? The source folder is the one that you're going to be doing most of your changes in. This is the folder within which you have your components, where you have everything. All right. So in the source folder, you have your main.ts, which is the entry point to your application. So this is the entry point to the application, which is actually shown here as well. So it would import all of the modules. So our module, this is one of the modules, app modules. I'll give you an explanation of what modules are and components are in the next lesson. But right now, let's just understand that modules, every project or every website contains multiple Angular modules. So every Angular website contains multiple Angular modules, and each of those Angular modules, they have their own components. Okay, so they can have more than one component. So that's how modules and components work. So right now we have this Angular app module, and within that app module, within that app module, we have a default app component, which is represented by these four files in here. The CSS file, HTML file, this is for the unit testing, which we'll look at the last, and then this is the TypeScript file. So TypeScript files are similar to your JavaScript files. The only difference is that they come with a .ts instead of a .js. Okay, so if you notice here, your if and everything, all of these are the same, right? So it's just JavaScript. You even have your fat arrows and everything. So here we are just importing the module, and we are bootstrapping. That is, we are starting up the application while bringing all the modules together right here. Okay, so that's what happens in your main.ts. Now, once that bootstraps, what would happen is it'll just go below here to the index.html, where everything is displayed. So I'll explain what this is later on. So this is where the entire application gets displayed. So your main.ts will bootstrap the application. It's the entry point to the application. And in the app folder, as I showed you, you have your app.module.ts, which is the root module of your application. So it's the root module of the application. So what does that mean? Now that means that this is the module that's going to contain all of the sub-modules. So for example, let's say you have a website. Okay, so website can have multiple modules, like I said. So there is your home page, that could be one of the modules. There is your contact page, that could be a module. There could be blog. Now in your blog, each blog post, that would be the components, right? And similarly, you can have other things like, services page with multiple service pages as components. There's also products. Okay, you get the idea in here, right? So these are the things. So you have multiple modules, and all of those are just going to come together in your root module, and especially your root app component. Okay, so your app module is the root module that is going to bring everything together. So each application has multiple modules, and each module has multiple components, but a module can have no component as well. It can just have one component as well. So for example, if you have a contact, you can just have that in one component as well, or you might want it in multiple components. So you can say the form is going to be a separate component, and then you can say I'm going to have a map that's going to be a separate component, and then you can have another component for just general information on how to contact the person or something like that. So you can have 3 components inside of it if you want. If it's a huge contact page, then you can have that. Or if you need this separately, the map separately, so you don't really complicate things. That's why we put things into components, so we don't really complicate a single component. So that's one of the beauties of using your frameworks, right? So if you have things as components, you don't complicate things too much, so you can debug them, check for errors easily, right? So that's how it works. All right, so that's your main entry point. And then you have your app component. So this is the root component of the application, as I showed you, and each application has multiple modules and components. All right, so each of these components, right, as I told you, they determine the view of the application. So every component right? It determines a particular view. So like I showed you before, if you have multiple service pages, each of those service page could be a component, and of the form, the contact form could be a component, the contact map could be a component, and the location map could be a component, the information can be a component, like that. So each of those is a particular view as in what the user sees, the display, right? So each of the component represents a particular view, and you can export and import between the modules, and ultimately you get the entire app. So after you create multiple modules, what you can do is you can export them, import them as needed. So you can just get the entire app, and of course in your app module you have to import all of the modules and components that come together to make your entire application. Actually, this is it. But there are other things, like there is your assets, which can be later used if you want to add some images or the database files or anything like that. Now the rest of it, actually you don't really need it much. These I'll explain while we get into these. Now these are just information about your project. So angular.json, you can just look at it and you'll know what the packages are, the packages in your file and everything. Now Karma and Jasmine, I'll explain them while we look at the basics of unit testing. And you have your package.json. So if you know things about npm, you'll know that in your package.json you'll have all of the packages that have been installed. So you'll see your Angular, a lot of the Angular dependencies like the animation, comment, compiler, core, forms, platform browser, router, all of those things that come with Angular. And there's also dev dependencies, developer dependencies, like Karma, TypeScript, of course TypeScript, and a lot of other things like that. Alright, so that's your package, and package log actually explains each of those packages in detail. So these are the files, so you can just take a look at them on your own. Now environments also has a bunch of files, but we won't be using that in this particular course, so it doesn't matter. Alright, so that's pretty much it. So that's how you create a project. That's how these are the files in the project. And of course, as I told you before, you can actually look at the output, right? Development output. And the best way to do that is by just opening this particular local host. Now every development server has its own port, and so does your Angular. So the generic port is actually 4200. Just open it up and you'll see the current output. Okay, this is the current output because that's the output that was created in your, of course I have to save these things obviously. So that's the output that was created in your HTML, CSS, and all of those things. So if you go to your HTML, you'll see that it has both styles and your HTML. Now CSS has nothing obviously because style was here as well. Alright, so if you go and look at this, there's a lot of CSS in here. So if you want, you can just create a new project and you can look through this as you want. And there you go. Look at this. You have this, right? So if you just look at this particular HTML and CSS is what we are seeing here. Okay, so you have all of these things. Okay, so all of these things, and then you've imported that into your app component. And then later on, what happened is, in your index.html, we are doing this. That is because of your app component.ts, because in your app component.ts, you have something like this, a decorator outside of your class. Now, if you know JavaScript, you must know about your classes and everything, right? Now this is a TypeScript thing. Now, this is all JavaScript, but this is an extra that comes with TypeScript. So you can use this to add something to your classes. Now, in our case, we used it to add a component decorator. So they call it a decorator, right? So it can basically be used to add some information. Now in our case, we are adding a selector, so basically the tag that you can use, and the template URL, which is the corresponding HTML of this particular class, and the corresponding style URLs of this particular class, that's CSS, that is. Alright, so these are the information in here, and in your class you can create projects and everything, and then you can embed them directly in your HTML, which is the beauty of Angular. In Angular, your HTML and your TypeScript, of course with CSS, they can all come together in one place. So there's a lot of dynamic aspect in here, so you can just directly embed the value of this title in your HTML. I'll show you in just a second. But now that you know that the selector of this particular component is AppRoot, you can come to your index and you can see that that's what's done here. So in this particular place, we have the entire app component embedded because we are using the AppRoot selected right here. So that means all of the HTML and CSS, because we know that's the HTML and CSS because we gave that in template URL and the style URLs. So all of the HTML and CSS has been embedded in there, right? Perfect. And also, if you just come and search for title in here, you'll notice that not this title. See, look at that. So somewhere in the 344th line of the default app component HTML, we'll be removing all of this. Don't worry. Once we start creating our own code, we will be removing all of this. But it's also good to know what Angular has done already, right? So in this, you see that there is your title. So there is this particular symbol there. There are two flower brackets and you have title in here. And if you look at that right here, somewhere in here, you would notice that it's gonna display that as well. See? Here, right here, it's saying Crash Course app is running because that is the project name. So that's the title actually. In here, the title was Crash Course because that it'll automatically create it like that. So that's how you can directly embed your TypeScript, basically JavaScript, but TypeScript is a superscript, so you can just call it TypeScript. So you can basically embed TypeScript directly into your HTML like this. And you can use it. So in the next lesson onwards, we'll be looking at these things more in detail. Alright, so I'll see you in the next lesson. Thank you.